Hi guys, we're going to be talking about the Caribbean today. The Caribbean is part of the North American continent. However, it's oftentimes considered its own region. It's an island region. Our objectives today are that we're going to use maps and globes to analyze and interpret the geography of the Caribbean, or the Caribbean, pronounced either way. We're going to locate the major island groups and countries of the Caribbean. We're going to describe the physical geography, how the islands were formed, and then also explain the nature and threat of the seismic activity in the Caribbean islands. There are 3 vocabulary terms for this lesson. The first is cay. A cay is a small, low island of coral or sand, and it's also spelled key, so a cay and a key are the same thing. Coral islands are islands that are formed by limestone skeletons of animals, and trade winds are steady air currents between 30 degrees north and south latitude and the equator. The region of the Caribbean can be divided into 3 distinct groups. They are the Bahamas, the Greater Antilles, and the Lesser Antilles. It's important to note that the Lesser Antilles are broken down even further into the Windward Islands and the Leeward Islands. There are 2 different ways that the land was formed in the Caribbean. The islands of the Greater and Lesser Antilles some of them were created from volcanoes, and some of them were created from underwater mountains. The terrain in these islands is generally rugged, and they have mountainous interiors and then low-lying coastal plains. The Bahamas, on the other hand, were formed a little bit differently. The Bahamas are made of coral. They are coral islands that were formed from the skeletons of coral polyps. Coral, if you've ever seen it in an aquarium or in real life, it is living, breathing matter, and then when it dies, it creates a limestone skeleton. When the coral dies, the skeletons form a coral reef. Over time, sand covers these skeletons, and in time, an island will emerge from the water. Eventually, soil will take root on the island, and then plants will grow, and then there you have an ecosystem that is born from that, and that is how the Bahamas came to be. There are tectonic plates in the Caribbean, so many of the Caribbean islands were formed as a result of plate movement. That's where we have those volcanic islands. The plate movement is from the North American plate, and it's moving beneath the Caribbean plate. This area exhibits several types of plate boundaries because there are 2 major plates and 2 minor plates that share its borders. These boundaries and their contact with one another promote the continuous movement even today, and that's why this area has extreme seismic activity. So anytime you hear seismic activity, you're going to think earthquakes, possible volcanoes. The climate of the Caribbean, as you can see, we've got the equator here. Right in this area, you have the Caribbean. So most of the Caribbean is going to have a tropical climate due to its location near the equator. The only exception would be the northern islands of the Bahamas. They might have more of a temperate climate. The climate of this region is affected by atmospheric and ocean currents. Ocean breezes blow over the land, cooling the warmer land masses. Because of these Caribbean breezes, most of the islands in the Caribbean maintain a constant 80 degrees, even though they're very close to the equator. But humidity here is very high, so there's a lot of moisture in the air. Most of the islands in this region have 2 rainy seasons, generally from May through June, and then September through November. The dry seasons are from January to March and July through August. Even though most of the Caribbean is tropical, keep in mind that climate conditions can vary in the region, even on the same island. This is especially true of the larger islands if it has high mountains. An overall theme that we've been seeing is that the higher up you go, the cooler the climate. Also, the coastal areas are generally cooler than the interior regions due to those Caribbean breezes coming from the sea. An example of this is on Hispaniola. On Hispaniola, which is Haiti and the Dominican Republic, pine trees that grow in temperate regions can be found at high elevations in the Cordillera Central. So even though Hispaniola is in the the throes of the equator, you can still find pine trees that grow in high elevations like in the Cordillera Range in the mountains. Another example would be in Puerto Rico. Lush vegetation can be found on the northeastern shore, while cactus, common in deserts, can be found on the southwestern coast. So just because the countries are in a tropical region doesn't necessarily mean that always reflects the exact climate. Trade winds play an important role in the Caribbean region. When ships were powered by sail, sailors relied on these trade winds to carry them between Europe and the New World, which is North America. The effects of the trade winds can be seen today on the windward side of these islands, windward meaning the north and eastern side. Here, with the trade winds, large waves crash against the cliffs, sand is mounded high on beaches, and palm trees are slanted inland. The only safe harbors are those that are mostly surrounded by land, such as Havana in Cuba or San Juan in Puerto Rico. The leeward side of the islands presents a different picture. The leeward side doesn't have as much of the winds, and so the waters here are calm, and there are many safe harbors, including harbors in Jamaica, Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, St. Lucia, Martinique, and Trinidad. Rainfall is also affected by these winds. The windward sides of islands receive a lot of the rainfall, and the leeward sides not so much. So the windward sides have the wind, hence windward. They have the wind and the rain, and then the leeward sides are a lot more gentle and mild with safe harbors. It's important for you guys to know that really the main natural resource there are a few, but the main natural resource of the Caribbean would be its beautiful beaches and clear ocean waters. Some of the islands benefit from rich soil, but most of the islands don't support much agriculture, especially those in the Bahamas, where those coral skeletons created the lands. There's not a whole lot of rich, fertile soil in those areas. The economies of the Caribbean have been really hurt in the past by natural hazards. This is a picture of Haiti in 2010 after a 7.0 earthquake attacked and killed over 160,000 people. So there are earthquakes in this area. There are also hurricanes. Being in the Caribbean, you have a greater chance of being hit by a hurricane. For example, Nassau, Bahamas, has a 1 in 5 chance of being hit by a hurricane. When hurricanes strike this area, they have devastating effects on the people who live on the islands. Basically based on poor infrastructure, a lot of the buildings aren't necessarily as strong as some of the buildings here, And so when hurricanes come through these areas, it really leaves a lot of destruction. Another natural hazard would be volcanoes. Many potentially active volcanoes exist in this region, and the heaviest concentration is that arc in the Lesser Antilles. There have been in the past major volcanic eruptions that were deadly. There was one in 1902 in Martinique, but then a little bit more recent, in 1995, Montserrat also had a major volcanic event. That volcano had been dormant for 400 years, and then it erupted and caused some destruction on the island of Montserrat. So basically, we've got, to sum it all up, we've got the Caribbean, also known as the West Indies, and it's comprised of three main island groups: the Greater Antilles, the Lesser Antilles, which includes the Windward Islands and Leeward Islands, and the Bahamas. The islands in this region were formed as a result of two physical processes, either volcanic mountains or coral formations. Most of the islands in this region are tropical, except northern Bahamas. Little temperature change is experienced by most islands, and the temperatures usually remain constant at around 80 degrees. Humidity is high, and the trade winds cool the island, so those cool island breezes are what cause it to be about 80 degrees, even though they're very close to the equator. Hurricanes threaten the islands, as do earthquakes and volcanoes. And the most valuable resources in the region are its beaches, pleasant climate, and clear water. Few mineral deposits have been found. However, recent findings include petroleum and natural gas deposits. There are slides on here that I'm not going to go over some of the main island nations of the Caribbean. If you're interested in that, please go ahead and look at the slides, and I'm going to post some videos, but for the purposes of our lesson, we don't need to get too far into the specifics of each island.